Why did the call feel wrong before he even saw the smoke? The helicopter blades carved the Afghan morning like a razor through silk. Dust and sunlight swirled in the open door as Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen pressed his medical kit tighter to his chest. The wind clawed at his uniform, carrying the smell of oil and cordite. Below, the mountains stretched like sleeping beasts, ancient, unmoved, and indifferent. He'd done this 100 times. Combat medic, SEAL team attachment. 3 years of blood and adrenaline and too many bodies zipped into black bags. But today, something in the briefing hadn't felt right. The radio operator had said multiple casualties, unknown origin. Those two words, unknown origin, were the kind that made seasoned soldiers go silent. They never meant good news. Usually it meant friendly fire, or something worse. Marcus's hand moved on instinct, checking the contents of his med pack for the 5th time. Morphine, clotting agents, bandages, chest seals. He didn't need to look, his fingers already knew where everything lived, but he checked anyway. You didn't take chances when lives depended on seconds. The pilot shouted over the rotor noise. "Outpost Sierra 9, they said it's bad." Marcus nodded but didn't answer. He'd seen bad before. He smelled it, carried it, failed to forget it. But even through the roar of the blades, he could feel that cold tightness in his chest, that medic's intuition that something was off. As the Blackhawk dipped lower, the outpost came into view. Concrete barriers, camouflage netting, sandbags piled high around prefab metal huts. Smoke twisted upward from what looked like a shattered communication tower. The place looked more like a scar than a base, remote, forgotten, carved into the ribs of a mountain. Marcus could already see soldiers running toward the landing zone, their faces pale, eyes wide. That hollow look, the one that said whatever happened, it wasn't supposed to. The Blackhawk touched down hard. Dust exploded around them. Before the rotors even slowed, a sergeant with dirt-caked fatigues ran up, shouting over the noise. "You the medic?" "Yeah," Marcus yelled back, grabbing his gear. "How many wounded?" "4 confirmed, maybe more. Aid stations this way." The sergeant's voice cracked. That told Marcus more than words ever could. They ran across the compound. Marcus's eyes scanned automatically, the way SEAL training taught him to. Scorch marks along a wall. Shrapnel embedded outward, not inward. That wasn't incoming fire. That was something detonating inside the perimeter. He didn't ask yet, he just filed it away. The aid station was a converted shipping container, red crosses painted on its sides. Even before he stepped inside, Marcus caught the scent. Blood, antiseptic, fear. The metallic tang clung to his tongue. Inside, chaos. 3 wounded soldiers lay on stretchers. A 4th sat slumped against the wall, pressing a bloody rag to his shoulder. A young private was trying and failing to keep pressure on a leg wound, his hands trembling. Marcus's training took over. "Talk to me," he said sharply. "What do we have?" "Explosion in the motor pool," the sergeant answered. "Johnson's the worst, shrapnel to the chest and gut." Marcus dropped to his knees beside the unconscious soldier, pulse weak, breathing shallow, abdomen distended, internal bleeding. He needed surgery now. "Where's medevac?" The sergeant hesitated. "Comms are down. The blast took out our radio array." Marcus froze for heartbeat. No medevac, no radio. They were on their own. He forced calm into his voice. "Then we stabilize him here." His hands moved fast, IV line, tourniquet, compression dressing. He barked orders the way combat medics do when there's no room for fear. The young private steadied, following his rhythm, falling into the medic's tempo, the rhythm of controlled chaos. Marcus worked his way down the line. 2nd patient, leg wound, deep but clean. 3rd, burns and concussion, manageable. Then he reached the 4th. A female soldier, pale but conscious. Blood soaked her sleeve. Shrapnel had torn through her left arm. The wound wasn't life-threatening, but it had been close. He crouched beside her. "I'm Marcus, Navy medic. You with me, Sergeant?" Her lips twitched. "Rivera, Sergeant Rivera." "All right, Rivera, let's keep you talking." As he cleaned the wound, something caught his eye. A small patch on her uniform, half hidden beneath dried blood and dirt. A stylized mountain peak with a star above it. Marcus's breath caught. That emblem. He hadn't seen it in 3 years. The 4th Mountain Division, Special Operations Support Unit. His brother's unit. David Chen's unit. The same one that had never officially existed after his brother's death. Marcus's hand froze, the antiseptic-soaked gauze halfway to her arm. The room faded for a moment, the hum of the generators, the moans of the wounded, even the constant throb of the helicopter rotors outside. It all fell away. Just that patch, that damn patch. Rivera's eyes, sharp even through the haze of pain, were on him, studying, measuring. "You recognize it," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Marcus forced himself back to work, trying to sound neutral. "I've seen it before." Her gaze didn't waver. "Your hands shook." He didn't answer. "Your brother," she whispered, voice barely audible. "David Chen." Marcus's heart slammed against his ribs. The instrument slipped from his grip, clattering against the metal floor. "How do you know that name?" She grimaced, pain flickering across her face. "Because he saved my life once." Before he could speak again, another voice cut in. The man with the shoulder wound, Corporal Williams. "Doc, we haven't been properly introduced," he said through gritted teeth. "That's Sergeant Rivera, our team lead. Johnson's our demo expert. And that explosion," he paused, jaw tightening, "that wasn't an accident." Marcus looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Rivera reached for his wrist, her fingers surprisingly strong despite the blood loss. "Not here," she whispered, "not in front of them." Then, more urgent, "What's your name?" "Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen." "Marcus Chen from Sacramento." He nodded slowly. Her expression changed, something between fear and recognition. "Your brother didn't die the way they said." Marcus's blood ran cold. "What?" But she just shook her head. "We'll talk later." Before Marcus could ask more, footsteps pounded outside. The sergeant who'd brought him in returned, but he wasn't alone. 2 soldiers followed, uniforms too clean for a forward outpost, their boots polished, their weapons different. Marcus didn't need to see the insignia to know who they were. Intel. Rivera's grip tightened on his wrist. Her whisper was like a warning hiss. "Don't believe a word they say, and whatever happens, don't let them separate us." The door opened. Sergeant Rivera, the older of the 2 newcomers, said smoothly, "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Hayes. We're here to debrief you about the incident." His smile was precise, controlled, cold. Rivera tried to sit up, failing. "Sir, we're still being treated." Hayes cut her off. "Of course, I only need a few moments." His gaze shifted to Marcus. "Sergeant Chen, SEAL Medic, appreciate your quick response. How are our casualties?" Marcus straightened. "1 critical, 2 stable, 1 moderate. They need immediate evac." "Understood," Hayes said. "We'll arrange that shortly." Marcus frowned. "I thought communications were down." Hayes smiled again, this time with teeth. They were. Marcus's stomach dropped. Something was very wrong. The other man, Captain Morrison, moved silently, scanning each soldier's IV lines, eyes cold and calculating. Rivera tensed, subtly shifting her body between Morrison and Johnson's stretcher. Hayes spoke again, voice smooth as polished glass. "We'll need a few minutes with each of them. Standard procedure after unexplained explosions." "Unexplained," Marcus repeated. Williams, still sitting against the wall, scoffed. "There's nothing unexplained about it. Someone sabotaged our gear." Hayes's eyes flicked to him, just a fraction too long. "Corporal, you're injured. Perhaps we'll speak privately." Rivera's jaw clenched. Marcus pretended to focus on bandages, but his senses sharpened. He'd been on too many missions not to recognize the feel of a setup. Then quietly, Rivera said, "Doc, check my left cargo pocket when you inspect the wound." Her voice was low, a whisper under the hum of machines. Marcus nodded faintly. He moved to her side, cleaning and checking her leg. As his hand brushed the pocket, his fingers closed around a small leather-bound notebook, blood-stained, worn, heavy. He slipped it into his sleeve without looking. Hayes was still talking. "We appreciate your cooperation, Sergeant Chen. You've done your duty here. We'll take over from here." Marcus kept his voice even. "With respect, sir, my patients aren't cleared for transport, not until I stabilize them." Hayes's smile didn't fade. "Of course, take all the time you need." But his eyes said something else. Behind that calm expression, Marcus saw it, that flicker of calculation. The same expression he'd seen on commanding officers before a classified sweep. Something big was being buried here. And somehow it tied back to David. As Marcus turned back to his patients, he caught Rivera's eyes again. There was fear there, but beneath it, resolve. Like she'd already decided what would come next. And as the low hum of the Black Hawk faded into the distance and the aid station door shut with a hollow clang, Marcus Chen understood one thing. This wasn't a rescue. It was a cover-up. And the emblem on Rivera's sleeve, the one his brother had died wearing, was about to drag him into the same darkness. Sometimes the battlefield isn't marked by gunfire or borders. Sometimes it begins with a single look and a truth that someone wants to stay buried. Why did the colonel's smile feel colder than the mountain air outside? Marcus Chen had seen that look before, the one commanding officers wore when they were pretending to care. It was the smile that came right before something terrible happened, wrapped neatly in paperwork and protocol. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes stood just inside the aid station, hands folded behind his back, his uniform untouched by dirt or blood. His partner, Captain Morrison, moved like a ghost, silent, clinical, eyes flicking between the wounded like he was inspecting lab specimens instead of people. Marcus kept his focus on the wounded, but every nerve in his body was on alert. The notebook in his sleeve felt like a live grenade. "Captain Morrison and I," Hayes began, his tone all calm authority, "just need a few minutes with each of your patients. Nothing intrusive, standard questioning." Marcus didn't look up. "You can question them after I stabilize them, sir." Hayes turned slightly. "Sergeant Chen, correct?" "Yes, sir." "You served with Naval Special Warfare. SEAL Medic, isn't that right?" Marcus nodded once. "Then you know the value of following command structure." Marcus met his eyes for the first time. "And you know the value of not sedating trauma patients without a damn reason." Hayes's lips tightened, but the smile returned just as quickly, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. Rivera shifted on her stretcher, grimacing. Her gaze darted between Hayes, Morrison, and Marcus. She knew this conversation wasn't about medicine anymore. "Colonel," she said through clenched teeth, "with all due respect, my team been through hell. We're not answering any intel questions until we've been properly treated." "Of course," Hayes replied smoothly, "and we appreciate your cooperation. Captain Morrison, would you check on the demolition specialist?" Marcus turned instinctively toward Johnson, the man lying unconscious on the far stretcher. Morrison moved faster than he expected, already leaning over the patient. He was doing something to the IV line, subtle but practiced. "Hey," Marcus started, crossing the room. Morrison straightened, just stabilizing him. Marcus's eyes dropped to the IV. The bag had been swapped. The liquid inside wasn't the clear saline he'd hung earlier, it was faintly amber, too viscous. "What did you just give him?" "Sedative." "That's not a sedative," Marcus said flatly. "That's respiratory suppressant." Morrison didn't even blink. He was becoming agitated. Agitated, Marcus snapped. He's half-conscious, bleeding internally, and you just shut down his breathing reflex. Are you trying to kill him? The room went still. Hayes's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. Sergeant Chen. Marcus turned slowly. Watch your tone. My patient's life depends on that tone. Rivera's eyes were locked on the scene, her hand inching toward her pocket, the one where her sidearm used to be before the explosion. It wasn't there anymore. Hayes studied Marcus for a long moment. Then, with almost theatrical patience, he said, Sergeant, I understand the stress you're under, but we are handling a sensitive situation here. What kind of situation? Hayes tilted his head. One that's well above your clearance. Marcus's jaw clenched. Try me. That earned him a faint chuckle from Morrison. Rivera spoke again, softly this time. Doc, can you check on Johnson? Marcus turned back to her, catching the slight movement of her lips, a whisper he almost missed. Notebook, she mouthed. He nodded, pretending to recheck her dressings. The blood-stained leather book was still tucked inside his sleeve. Rivera's eyes darted to the two intelligence officers, then back to him. Whatever they say, don't trust them. The sergeant who'd fetched Marcus earlier stood uncertainly near the door, caught between orders and confusion. He was young, maybe 23. Sweat glistened on his temple. Sir, he said to Hayes, shouldn't we call for backup from command? This isn't. Out, Hayes said sharply. The sergeant hesitated, then left. The door closed. The sound of it echoed through the metal walls like the lid of a coffin. Marcus knelt beside Johnson again. The man's pulse was weak, irregular. He'd been drugged, that much was clear. But beneath the shallow breathing, Johnson's eyes fluttered open. Don't let them take it, he whispered. Marcus leaned closer. Take what? The cache coordinates. Johnson's voice was paper-thin. Your brother left them. Marcus froze. What did you just say? Johnson's lips trembled. Valley Stone Dogs, he found it. Before Marcus could ask more, Morrison stepped forward, syringe in hand. That's enough, he's delirious. Marcus grabbed his wrist midair. You inject him again and I'll break your arm. Hayes took a slow step forward. Sergeant Chen, stand down. No. Excuse me. Marcus rose, standing between Morrison and the wounded soldier. You're not touching him again. None of you. The colonel's calm facade cracked for a heartbeat, a flash of irritation behind the polite mask. Then the mask returned. Very well, Hayes said, voice steady again. Captain Morrison, stand down. Morrison withdrew, sliding the syringe back into his kit with a faint smirk. Hayes turned to Marcus again. We'll arrange for medical evacuation within the hour. Marcus frowned. You said comms were down. They were, Hayes said smoothly. We've made alternate arrangements. How convenient, Marcus muttered. What was that? Nothing, sir. Hayes stepped closer, lowering his voice. I know who you are, Sergeant Chen, and I know what happened to your brother. Marcus's blood turned to ice. Hayes continued. It was tragic, truly, but I advise you not to let grief cloud your judgment here. Marcus stared at him. What do you know about David? Hayes smiled faintly, enough to know curiosity killed him. Rivera's breathing hitched. Marcus's world narrowed to a point. Say that again. Hayes leaned in, lowering his voice to something almost intimate. Your brother found something he shouldn't have. You're about to make the same mistake. Marcus took a step forward, but Rivera's whisper stopped him. Doc, don't. Morrison was already watching, hand near his sidearm. Marcus stepped back slowly, forcing his rage into silence. Then at least tell me this, he said quietly. Was it you who wrote his report? Hayes smiled, cold and satisfied. Officially, no one did. The sound that came from Marcus wasn't quite a word, more like the sound of something breaking quietly inside him. Johnson stirred weakly behind them, coughing blood. Rivera tried to rise, wincing from the pain. "Sir," she said tightly, "with all due respect, my team's mission was under direct command of SOCOM. You have no authority to—" "Authority," Hayes interrupted softly, "is a matter of perspective, Sergeant, especially out here." Morrison's radio crackled. A faint voice reported something unintelligible. Hayes nodded once. "Your helicopter will be here in 20 minutes, Sergeant Chen," he said. "You'll be returning to base." Marcus shook his head. "I'm not leaving my patients." "That's not a request." Rivera's eyes locked on his. "Don't let them separate us," she whispered again. Hayes's tone hardened. "You've done your part, Sergeant. We'll take it from here." Marcus looked at the faces around him, Rivera, pale and sweating but defiant. Williams, groggy but alert. Johnson, half-conscious and dying. Morrison, calm and predatory. Hayes, smiling like a man who already knew the ending. And then Marcus understood. None of them were getting out of here. Not alive. He glanced toward the window slit, saw movement outside. 2 more soldiers, unmarked uniforms, taking positions near the exits. He needed a plan. "Colonel," Marcus said quietly, "I need to speak with you privately about Johnson's condition." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Now?" "Yes, sir. Confidential medical matter. Protocol requires." Hayes sighed. "Fine, Captain, watch the others." Morrison nodded, stepping between Rivera and Williams. Marcus led Hayes to the far end of the aid station, near the storage crates. He lowered his voice. "Johnson's bleeding internally. If we don't move him to a real surgical facility, he's dead within the hour." "Then he's already dead," Hayes said flatly. Marcus kept his expression neutral, but inside something burned. He leaned in slightly. "Sir, if this is about whatever my brother found—" Hayes's smile faltered. "You really should stop asking questions you don't want answers to." Behind them, a metallic clatter. Morrison had moved toward Rivera's IV again. Marcus turned slightly, catching Rivera's gaze. Her fingers twitched once, a signal. Something she'd done intentionally. She was still fighting. Then Johnson's voice, weak, barely a whisper. "Doc, your brother left proof." Hayes's head snapped toward him. "He's conscious." Marcus reacted before the colonel could move. "Sir, step back. You'll compromise the sterile field." Hayes frowned. "Sterile field." Marcus didn't give him a chance to think. He grabbed the colonel's arm, pretending to adjust his stance, and slipped the blood-stained notebook from his sleeve into his cargo pocket. "I'll need to run blood tests," Marcus said quickly, trying to keep his voice level. "Can you have your men prep?" He stopped. Hayes wasn't looking at him anymore. He was staring down at his uniform sleeve, where a small smear of dried blood now marked the fabric. "Whose blood is that, Sergeant?" Marcus hesitated. "Johnson." Hayes studied him for a moment too long. Then slowly, "You're lying." Marcus didn't breathe. Then the sudden crackle of radio chatter cut through the tension. Morrison's voice, low but urgent. "Sir, command wants confirmation. Extraction window confirmed. 10 minutes." Hayes nodded once. "Understood." He turned to Marcus. "Thank you for your assistance. Your services are no longer required." Marcus didn't move. "You'll be escorted to the landing zone." "I'm not leaving them." Hayes's tone turned soft, dangerously soft. "You are, Sergeant, one way or another." For a long moment, neither man spoke. Only the faint hum of equipment filled the space. Then Rivera's voice, raw, defiant, broke the silence. "Marcus," she said. He looked at her. Her eyes, bloodshot and fierce, held his with steady intensity. "Whatever happens next, remember your brother." The words hit harder than any order ever could. Marcus's throat tightened. He looked from her to Hayes, then to Morrison. And something inside him finally, quietly decided. He would not leave them behind. Not this time. Outside, the low thrum of helicopter blades began to build again, distant but growing. And as the dust rose over the ridge and the first black silhouette appeared against the burning Afghan sky, Marcus Chen realized something he couldn't yet say aloud. He wasn't part of a rescue mission anymore. He was standing inside the cover story for a massacre. Sometimes orders aren't meant to be followed. They're meant to be tested by the ones who still remember what conscience feels like. What would you risk to hear the truth if you already knew it could destroy you? The helicopter's shadow crawled over the outpost like a dark omen. Dust coiled upward as its rotors whipped the air, but inside the aid station the heat was still, a trapped breath waiting to exhale. Marcus Chen stood motionless beside the stretchers, pulse thrumming in his ears. Hayes was giving quiet orders to his men, the kind that didn't need to be heard to be understood. Morrison checked his watch, then the door, like a man counting seconds until cleanup. Rivera was the only sound that felt human. Her breathing, shallow, stubborn proof that not everything in this metal box was mechanical. Marcus moved toward her under the pretense of checking a pulse. "Stay with me, Sergeant," he said aloud. Then, under his breath, "We're leaving, not their way." She didn't speak. Her eyelids fluttered once in acknowledgement. The notebook in his pocket burned like a confession. He wanted to open it to know what his brother had died for, but the timing was wrong. Every eye in the room was a scope. Morrison's radio cracked. "Command confirms 5-minute window." Hayes nodded. "Understood. Secure the wounded for transport." Marcus stepped between them and the stretchers. "No one's stable enough to move." "We'll take that risk." "It's not your risk to take." Hayes's eyes sharpened. "Sergeant, you're out of line." "Maybe, but I'm right." For the first time, Hayes's control slipped. His voice dropped to a whisper that carried more threat than volume. "You think this is about medicine. It's about containment. You have no idea what's at stake here." "I know what's at stake," Marcus said. "Lives." Rivera coughed softly, blood on her lip. "Doc," she murmured, "don't waste your breath. They already decided who lives." The words hit like shrapnel. Marcus looked at her, saw the quiet acceptance in her eyes, the same look David had worn in that final video call years ago. He couldn't let it end the same way. The rotor wash outside deepened. The helicopter was close now, close enough to rattle the thin metal walls. Hayes turned to Morrison. "When the bird touches down, load the wounded. Chen goes last." Morrison's smirk was a confirmation of everything Marcus feared. That was the moment Marcus made his move. He turned, pretending to reach for a medical kit, and instead unclipped a smoke grenade from the supply crate, standard issue for medevac signaling. No one noticed. Not yet. He needed a distraction. 30 seconds of chaos, just enough to get Rivera, Williams, and Johnson out. "Colonel," Marcus said evenly, "before you move anyone, I need your signature on the medical transfer forms. Chain of custody for controlled substances." Hayes frowned. "Now." "Protocol." Hayes sighed, impatient, and stepped closer. That was all Marcus needed. He pulled the pin with his thumb and dropped the grenade behind the cot. A hiss, a bloom of gray, and the world vanished in smoke. Shouts erupted. Morrison cursed. Someone fired a warning shot that ricocheted off the wall. Marcus grabbed Rivera's stretcher and shoved it toward the rear door. "Williams," he yelled through the haze, "on your feet." The corporal staggered up, blinking through the smoke. "What the hell?" "Move." He didn't need to be told twice. They lifted Johnson between them, half dragging, half carrying him toward the exit. Bullets sparked off the metal doorframe as they burst into the alley behind the aid station. Cold air hit them like a slap. The motor pool lay ahead, a graveyard of twisted vehicles and burning tires. One Humvee, somehow untouched, sat parked near the gate. The keys dangled from the ignition. Luck or bait, Marcus didn't care. They piled in, Williams at the wheel, Rivera beside him, still bleeding, rifle across her lap, Johnson in back, gasping. Marcus pressed a hand against the wound, feeling the life ebbing beneath his palm. "Go!" The Humvee roared forward, smashing through the half-collapsed gate. Behind them, the aid station blurred into smoke and gunfire. Morrison's voice crackled through a radio somewhere behind. "Do not let them leave the perimeter." Machine gun bursts followed, rounds sparking off the vehicle's armor. Williams swerved onto a dirt path that climbed into the mountains. Marcus ducked as a bullet shattered the rear window. "They'll have air support in minutes." "Then we better disappear before that," Williams said through clenched teeth. Rivera turned in her seat, wincing. "There's a ridge to the north, old supply route, leads toward the valley of the stone dogs." Marcus looked up sharply, the same words Johnson had whispered. "Stone dogs?" he asked. Rivera nodded weakly. "It's real. It's where David found the evidence." Marcus felt something twist in his chest, grief, hope, disbelief, all tangled together. "You knew my brother." Rivera looked at him, eyes glassy with pain. "I was there the night he died." The world narrowed again. "Tell me." "Not now," she pointed ahead. "Focus, they'll be on us any second." As if summoned, the first helicopter appeared over the ridge, black, unmarked, sliding through the morning sun like a shark through water. Gunfire raked the ground behind them. Williams jerked the wheel, throwing the Humvee into a dry riverbed. Marcus held Johnson down as the vehicle jolted over the rocks. The wounded man's breathing hitched, shallow, wet. "He's crashing," Marcus shouted. Rivera reached back, pressing her blood-stained hand against Johnson's arm. "Hold on, buddy. We're almost there." Johnson's eyes fluttered. "No, you're not. They'll never stop." "Don't talk." He coughed, crimson flecking his lips. "Listen, your brother found something. A cache, coordinates hidden in his report. Rivera has them." Marcus glanced at her. She didn't deny it. "What's in the cache?" Johnson swallowed hard. "Proof, recordings, deals, everything Hayes was part of." "Hayes," Marcus said, "or someone higher." Johnson gave a faint, bitter smile. "You think it stops with him?" The Humvee hit a bump that sent them airborne for a second. When it landed, the right tire blew, throwing the vehicle sideways. Williams fought the steering, bringing it to a sliding halt behind a ridge. "We're done driving," he said. "From here it's feet." Above them the helicopter circled, searching. Rivera checked her rifle. "We head north through that canyon. The valley's 5 clicks." Johnson groaned. "Leave me, you'll move faster." "Not happening," Marcus said. He cut open the man's vest and started working. His hands were steady, but his heart was. "You hang on. You're going to see this through." Johnson gave a weak laugh. "Doc, you don't even believe that." "Doesn't matter what I believe. It matters what I do." They moved, Rivera leading despite the blood on her sleeve, Williams covering the rear, Marcus carrying most of Johnson's weight, every step a silent vow. The canyon swallowed them. Sunlight vanished. Only echoes and heartbeats remained. Behind them, faint, the sound of rotors growing louder. Rivera stopped, leaning against the wall, breathing hard. "We need to split. They'll track us if we stay together." "No," Marcus said. "We stick as one. They'll pick us off otherwise." She looked at him. "You don't understand. The cache isn't just evidence. It's leverage. If we get it to the right people, we can bring them down. But if they catch us together, it dies here." Her tone wasn't pleading. It was matter of fact, the voice of someone who'd already made peace with death. Marcus shook his head. "I'm not losing another one of you." "Your brother said that too." He froze. "What?" She swallowed hard. "He wouldn't leave anyone behind. That's why they killed him." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Marcus said, "Then let's make sure that's not how this ends." Rivera's gaze softened, not pity, but something like respect. "You really are his brother." A distant thud echoed down the canyon. explosion or artillery, Marcus couldn't tell. Dust rained from the rocks above. "Keep moving," he said. They pushed deeper into the narrowing gorge. The air grew colder. Marcus's arms burned from carrying Johnson. Every step was an argument between muscle and will. At last the canyon widened into an open basin. Jagged cliffs loomed on either side, carved into shapes that looked almost animal. Stone heads with open jaws. Rivera pointed. "The Valley of the Stone Dogs." Marcus stared, breath-catching. The landscape looked like something out of myth, beautiful, brutal, and utterly empty. "Your brother picked this place for a reason," Rivera said. "Hidden, defensible off every map." Johnson stirred weakly, north wall halfway up his mark. Marcus followed his gaze. There, a faint carving on the rock face. A cross, simple and unmistakable. Rivera nodded. "That's it." Gunfire cracked behind them. The first of Hayes's men had found their trail. Bullets ricocheted off the stone, sending echoes screaming across the valley. "Go," Marcus shouted. They sprinted toward the cliff. Williams dropped to a knee, firing controlled bursts to cover their ascent. Rivera slung her rifle over her shoulder and started climbing, her wounded arm trembling but steady. Marcus followed, half-dragging Johnson with a rope improvised from bandages and belts. The climb tore skin and reopened wounds. The rocks were slick with dust and blood. Below, Williams yelled, "They're flanking." Marcus looked down, saw movement. 6 men advancing, shadows flickering under the helicopter's searchlight. Williams pulled back. "Not yet." He fired again, short bursts, deliberate, delaying the inevitable. Marcus reached the ledge, hauling Johnson up beside him. Rivera was already there, bleeding from her palm, eyes fixed on the dark mouth of a cave ahead. "Inside," she said. They stumbled into the shadows just as another explosion rocked the valley floor. Heat rolled in behind them. The entrance shuddered, raining pebbles. Inside, the air was cold and damp. Flashlights cut narrow beams through the dark. The cave stretched deeper, a tunnel carved by nature and time. Marcus set Johnson down gently. "We're safe for now." Rivera leaned against the wall, panting. "Not safe, just unseen." Marcus looked at her. "You said you were there the night David died. Tell me what happened." For a long moment she didn't answer, then softly. "He found proof, recordings of arms deals between American officers and insurgents. He was supposed to hand them over to Hayes for secure transmission. But Hayes was part of it. David realized too late." Marcus's jaw tightened. "How did he die?" Rivera looked away. "He tried to get the evidence out. They ambushed us at extraction. He drew fire so I could escape." Marcus closed his eyes. He knew they'd come for him. He smiled when he said it. Her voice broke. "Said truth always has bad aim but good timing." Marcus let out a shaky breath. "Then we finish what he started." Rivera nodded. "There's a terminal in the cave. He set it up before he died. If it still works, it'll have everything." She shone her flashlight ahead. The beam caught a tangle of cables, old military crates, and something that looked like a field laptop buried under dust. Marcus stepped closer. The screen flickered as if recognizing his touch. And there, etched faintly into the rock beside it, a medic's cross, his brother's mark. Rivera whispered, "Welcome home, Doc." Sometimes the truth isn't lost, it's buried, waiting for the one person stubborn enough to dig with their bare hands. How much truth can a man carry before it breaks him? The cave swallowed them whole. The outside world, gunfire, rotors, shouts, faded into a distant storm. Inside, there was only the sound of breathing and dripping water. The air was heavy, ancient. Dust motes drifted in their flashlights like memories refusing to settle. Marcus Chen knelt beside the terminal. The flickering light of its cracked screen painted his face pale blue. Each flicker felt like a heartbeat, weak, uncertain, but alive. Rivera crouched next to him, her injured arm bound with a blood-soaked sling. Johnson lay against the wall, his breathing shallow but steady for now. Williams hadn't made it inside yet. He was still out there, holding the line against men who weren't supposed to exist. Marcus pressed the power switch. The old military laptop whined, the hum of a generator somewhere deeper in the cave answering it. Lights blinked, hesitated, then came alive. A password prompt filled the screen. Rivera exhaled. It's still locked. Marcus stared at the glow, his mind tumbling through a dozen guesses. His brother's birthday, their mother's maiden name, unit codes, nothing worked. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. David, what the hell would you use? Rivera's gaze softened. He was proud of you, you know. Always said his little brother was the better soldier. Marcus gave a bitter half-smile. He used to joke that I fixed what he broke. Rivera's lips curved faintly. Then maybe that's your answer. Marcus blinked. What? She nodded toward the keyboard. Try something a medic would choose. He hesitated, then typed, Corpsman. The screen blinked once, then unlocked. The cave seemed to exhale. A desktop loaded, cluttered with files, maps, folders labeled operations, audio, coordinates Morrison. One folder blinked with a red symbol labeled Upload Ready. Rivera leaned closer. He did it. He actually finished it. Marcus clicked it open. The first file loaded automatically, a video. The screen showed a man sitting in a dim tent, face drawn, eyes sunken. His voice was soft, deliberate. David Chen. Marcus froze. He hadn't seen that face in 3 years, not since the last video call before his brother's death. If you're watching this, David said quietly, it means I didn't make it out. And if you're the one watching, Marcus, then I was right about you. Rivera turned away, giving Marcus the privacy she knew he needed. David continued, I found something, bigger than I thought. Hayes isn't rogue. He's covering for Morrison, not the captain, the general. They're moving weapons, data, soldiers, selling to the same people we're fighting. They're using us to make a profit. He looked down, then back into the camera. I'm sending everything I've got to this cave. Coordinates embedded in my final patrol report. If you find it, finish what I started. Don't trust anyone in command, especially not Hayes. Marcus felt the words dig into him like nails. His brother's tone wasn't desperate, it was resigned. The kind of voice soldiers use when they already know the ending. The file ended. Silence filled the cave again. Rivera whispered, he knew they'd come for him. Marcus stared at the blank screen. He knew they'd come for us too. Outside, the faint echo of gunfire broke the stillness. Williams was still fighting. Marcus turned toward the sound. We can't stay here long. Rivera nodded. We copy what we can, then we run. Marcus opened another file, photographs of ledgers, transaction logs, encrypted messages, all connecting one thing to another. Arms shipments redirected to insurgent zones. Payment routed through shell companies tied to U.S. military procurement. Names, dates. And one document that made his blood freeze. Operation Stone Ledger. Signed by General A. Morrison. Marcus whispered, Jesus Christ. Rivera read over his shoulder. It's worse than we thought. Footsteps echoed from the tunnel mouth, heavy, urgent. Williams burst into the cave, panting, his rifle low and smoking. They're coming, 2 squads minimum, helicopter landing in the valley, we've got minutes. Rivera turned to Marcus. We take the evidence and go. Where? There's a back exit deeper inside. Narrow, but it leads to the ridgeline. David mentioned it once. Marcus began pulling drives, yanking cables, stuffing hard disks into his pack. We can't carry it all. Rivera snatched the satellite phone from her vest, the same one she'd taken off Hayes's men. We don't have to, we broadcast. She powered it on. The screen flared to life. If this still connects to the encrypted network, we can upload directly. Marcus's fingers moved faster. Start it. Rivera tapped commands with trembling hands. A progress bar appeared. Upload 2%. Williams checked his ammo. We'll never hold them that long. Marcus looked at Rivera. How much time? 10 minutes if we're lucky. They weren't going to get 10 minutes. The sound of rotor blades grew louder. Dust drifted from the cave ceiling. Hayes's men were closing in. Johnson groaned softly, eyes flickering open. Doc. Marcus knelt beside him. I'm here. Johnson tried to speak, voice cracking. I told your brother not to trust Hayes. He thought he could fix it from the inside. Marcus tightened his grip on the man's shoulder. Save your strength. No, Johnson rasped. Listen, Morrison isn't just selling weapons. He's selling intel, troop movements, positions to anyone who pays. Marcus swallowed hard. That's treason. Johnson's eyes fluttered shut. That's business. Then his breathing stopped. Rivera looked away. Williams bowed his head. Marcus stared at the lifeless man on the ground. In the distance, another explosion shook dust from the ceiling. Upload at 34%, Rivera said quietly. The helicopter sound was deafening now. Shadows flickered against the cave walls. Marcus picked up his rifle. Williams, take cover near the entrance. Buy us time. Williams nodded, moving into position. Rivera kept working. You don't have to stay, Doc, if they get inside. I'm not leaving you. She smiled faintly. You sound like him. Marcus looked at her. David. She nodded. He said that too. The first bullets tore into the cave mouth, ricocheting off stone. Williams fired back, the strobe of muzzle flash lighting the walls. Marcus returned fire beside him. Rivera crouched lower over the laptop, blood dripping from her arm onto the keyboard. 70%. The firefight grew closer. 2 men entered, shadows moving in the smoke. Marcus dropped one with a controlled burst. The second tossed a flashbang. The explosion lit the chamber white. The world went silent for 3 seconds, just light and ringing. Marcus blinked, disoriented. When sound returned, Rivera was on the floor, struggling to get back up. He dragged her behind the rock, shielding her as another burst of gunfire shattered the terminal screen. The upload window still glowed faintly, 89%. Rivera's fingers reached for the satellite phone. It's enough. We can finish it later. Marcus grabbed her hand. You can't move. Doc, if we don't get that data out, David died for nothing. She reached for the phone again. There's another tunnel behind the equipment, leads upward. Williams shouted from the entrance. They're flanking left. Marcus fired another burst, dropping 2 more silhouettes. Smoke and gunpowder burned in his lungs. Rivera's voice cut through the chaos. Marcus. He turned, saw her aiming her sidearm past him. A flash. The last attacker fell. Rivera lowered the gun, wincing as she breathed. You're welcome. He almost smiled. You still owe me a story. I'll tell you when we're out. She slung the phone over her shoulder, grabbed the remaining hard drives, and nodded toward the tunnel. Go, I'll cover. Marcus shook his head. You're shot. Exactly. I'm slower I stay, you run. He stepped closer. Not this time. She stared at him, saw the stubbornness, the grief, the fire that was his brother's mirror. Finally, she exhaled. Fine, then we move together. They ran. The tunnel was narrow, jagged, alive with echoes of battle. Behind them, Williams laid down suppressive fire until his rifle clicked empty. A second later, a thunderous explosion filled the chamber. The shockwave threw them forward. The blast had sealed the tunnel behind them, cutting off pursuit and burying Williams. Rivera stopped shaking. He knew. Marcus forced her forward. Then we don't waste it. The passage climbed steeply, daylight flickering ahead. They emerged onto a narrow ledge high above the valley. Wind howled around them. The satellite phone's antenna blinked faintly, Upload complete. Rivera looked at it dazed. We did it. Marcus stared at the phone, then at the smoke rising from below. We'll see. A helicopter swept through the canyon beneath them, Hayes's insignia glinting in the sunlight. Rivera crouched low, gripping her rifle. He's not going to stop, she said. Then neither do we. Marcus looked back toward the cave. His brother's evidence, his brother's grave. The place where truth had been buried and unearthed again. The wind carried the faint smell of burning diesel and blood. He thought of David's last words in that video. Don't trust command, don't trust silence. He understood it now. Rivera closed her eyes, leaning against the rock. Marcus, when this is over, you'll have to testify. They'll come for us again. He nodded slowly. Then we give them a reason to be afraid. Down in the valley, more helicopters approached, black dots against the pale sky. Marcus slung his rifle and turned toward the ridge. Come on, there's still a war to finish. Sometimes courage isn't loud. It doesn't shout or charge or conquer. It just refuses to stay silent. When does survival stop being a mission and start becoming a confession? The ridge was knife-thin. Wind clawed at their faces, carrying the metallic scent of war and the faint echo of rotor blades in the distance. Below them, the valley burned, a smear of black smoke and fractured stone where the cave had collapsed. Hayes's forces were scouring the wreckage, unaware their quarry was already climbing toward the mountains. Marcus Chen's boots scraped over loose shale. His lungs burned. Rivera moved behind him, slower now, her wounded arm pressed to her side. She was pale, trembling, but silent. They were running out of everything: ammo, strength, time. Marcus stopped at a small outcropping, scanning the horizon. Nothing but endless rock and the cold blue sweep of sky. For a second, it felt like the whole world had emptied itself of life. Rest, he said softly. Rivera sank against a boulder, exhaling a shaky breath. We shouldn't have made it out. Marcus looked down at the smoke-filled valley. Maybe we didn't. She managed a faint smile. That's a very medic thing to say. He didn't answer. His mind was already working, calculating distances, possibilities. They had one satellite phone, damaged but functional. The upload had finished, but he didn't know where the files had gone. Maybe command received them. Maybe someone erased them before they even reached a secure server. Who did David send it to? He asked quietly. Rivera shook her head. He never told me, said if I didn't know, they couldn't torture it out of me. Marcus nodded slowly. Smart. The wind picked up. The faint thump of rotors returned, closer this time. They're sweeping north, Rivera said, tilting her head. He knows we're on foot. Marcus's jaw tightened. Then we stopped being predictable. He pulled a folded map from his vest, a rough terrain sketch his brother had drawn. There's an old shepherd's path along the ridge. It leads to an abandoned relay station. If we can power it, maybe we can send another transmission, something they can't intercept. Rivera pushed herself upright, grimacing. Then let's move. They pressed on. The path narrowed, snaking between cliffs that looked like fossilized waves. Every few steps, Marcus glanced back, habit, training, fear. The sun was lowering, staining the sky in amber and smoke. Rivera stumbled once. Marcus caught her, steadying her by the shoulders. Her skin was clammy, pulse weak. You're bleeding again. She shook her head. Keep going. He stopped anyway, pulling a field dressing from his pack. You won't make it another mile if we don't fix this. Rivera looked away. You sound like him again. Marcus paused mid-rap. David. Yeah, she whispered. He'd stopped mid-firefight just to patch someone up. Said it wasn't about saving everyone. It was about saving the ones who still believed they could be saved. Marcus tied off the bandage, the memory hitting like a slow punch. He used to say that when we were kids. Guess he never grew out of it. Rivera smiled faintly. That's not something you grow out of. That's something you die with. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with everything they hadn't said. Then the air changed, a sound like thunder rolling over stone. Helicopter closer. Marcus grabbed her hand. Run. They sprinted along the ridge, ducking behind boulders as the searchlight swept across the terrain. The helicopter banked low, circling. A voice boomed through a loudspeaker, Hayes's voice, calm and precise. Sergeant Chen, Sergeant Rivera, you've done well enough, but this ends now. Rivera clenched her jaw. He's enjoying this. Marcus raised his rifle, sighting the chopper. He didn't fire, not yet. He just needed a chance, a mistake. You think you've exposed anything? Hayes's voice echoed again. You think command doesn't already know? We are command. Rivera yelled over the wind. He's bluffing. Marcus didn't answer. His hands were steady, but his thoughts weren't. If Hayes was right, if the corruption went higher, then what was the point? Who was left to trust? The helicopter swung wide, tail door opening. Figures appeared inside, silhouettes with rifles aiming. Down, Marcus shouted. They dove behind a rock as rounds chewed through the ground around them. Shards of stone sliced Marcus's cheek. He didn't feel it. He just counted bursts, measured distance, waited. When the gunfire paused, he rose halfway and fired 3 controlled shots. The third hit, the gunner slumped, weapon spinning out of his hands. The helicopter lurched, banking left. Rivera fired, her bullet sparking off the fuselage. The chopper climbed sharply, retreating beyond the ridge. They stayed down until the sound faded. Rivera looked at him, breath ragged. You hit him. Yeah. She nodded, good. Marcus checked the satellite phone. The screen still glowed, a weak signal bouncing between coordinates. We're close to the relay station. Another kilometer. They moved again, slower now. The world was turning gold, the light slanting through the mountain peaks like dying embers. By the time they reached the station, the sun was almost gone. The building was nothing more than a cracked concrete shell with a collapsed antenna leaning like a broken spine. Rivera exhaled. Looks promising. Marcus forced the door open. Inside, dust, cables, and an old generator half buried under debris. He brushed off the controls. If this thing still has fuel, we might have a chance. Rivera sank to the floor, back against the wall. Her head lolled slightly. You've said that word too many times today. What word? Chance. He smiled faintly. Then I'll stop saying it when we stop getting them. He pulled the starter cord. Nothing, again, a sputter. Then, finally, a cough of life. The generator rattled, trembling, but it stayed on. The terminal beside it blinked, one tiny green light. Marcus connected the satellite phone to the system. If I can boost the signal, maybe we can transmit to an open-frequency relay. Broadcast everything David recorded wideband. Rivera blinked slowly. Public. Yeah. Then it's over. Marcus hesitated. No, then it just starts. Outside, the wind carried voices, faint, disciplined, growing closer. Hayes's men had followed the smoke. Marcus's hands moved faster, almost there. Rivera reached for her pistol, loading her last magazine. I'll hold them. He shook his head. We hold them. She gave a weak laugh. Always splitting the glory, huh? Always. The first shadows appeared at the window, dark shapes moving with precision. Marcus hit the transmit key. The console blinked, sending data, one of 43 files. Gunfire erupted, shredding the doorway. Marcus ducked, firing back. The smell of cordite filled the air. Rivera picked off one of the silhouettes, then another, but the recoil jarred her wound. Keep sending, she yelled. 17 files, Marcus shouted back. A grenade rolled through the doorway. He saw it an instant before it exploded. The blast tore through the wall, throwing them both back. When Marcus came to, the room was smoke and ringing. The generator was sputtering, the console cracked but still sending. He crawled toward Rivera. She was on the floor, eyes half open, blood pooling beneath her side. "Stay with me," he said, pressing down on the wound. She coughed weakly. "Doc, stop doing that. You're not dying here." She smiled faintly. "You really are just like him." He felt his throat tighten. "Don't." David said once, "The hardest part about being good is that it never feels like winning." Tears blurred his vision. "You tell me that after I patch you up." The console beeped. 41 files sent. Rivera's hand found his wrist. "Marcus, if we don't make it, make sure they know, not just what happened, who we were." He nodded, jaw trembling. "I will." The doorway erupted again, Hayes himself stepping through the smoke, pistol raised. His uniform was immaculate, untouched by battle, his calm as chilling as ever. "Sergeant Chen," he said, "you've made this harder than it needed to be." Marcus stood slowly, shielding Rivera with his body. "You killed my brother." Hayes tilted his head. "No, your brother killed himself the moment he chose disobedience." Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger. "That's one word for conscience." Hayes smiled faintly. "And yours, what do you call this, treason or just sentimentality?" Marcus fired. The bullet tore through Hayes's shoulder, spinning him backward. He dropped the pistol, clutching his arm. The console beeped again. All files transmitted. Rivera's voice was a whisper. "Doc, it's done." Marcus didn't move. He stepped toward Hayes, rifle aimed, voice cold. "You said it was about containment." Hayes sneered through pain. "It always is. You think truth matters. They'll bury this by morning. You're just another ghost in the system." Marcus stared at him, really stared, then lowered his weapon slightly. "You're right," he said quietly. "They might bury it." He picked up the satellite phone, thumbed the emergency key, and set it down on the console. A beacon tone pulsed, open broadcast. "But they can't unhear it." Outside, the sound of more helicopters echoed, different pitch this time. Not Hayes's, different insignia. Rivera smiled faintly through the pain. Guess someone was listening after all. Marcus looked at her, relief flickering through exhaustion. "You did it." She shook her head weakly. "No, we did." Then her eyes fluttered closed. He caught her as she slumped, his hands slick with blood and dust. "Rivera, hey, look at me." No response. Marcus pressed his forehead against hers, whispering through clenched teeth. "You made them listen." The helicopters drew closer, the sound like thunder breaking through grief. Hayes sat slumped against the wall, silent, pale. His eyes, the first time, showed something almost human: fear. Marcus turned toward the shattered doorway, toward the light of approaching rescue or judgment. He didn't care which anymore. He whispered almost to himself, "Sometimes silence saves no one." He looked down at Rivera, his voice breaking. "But she did." Sometimes the bravest thing isn't pulling the trigger. It's refusing to stay quiet when the world demands you do. How do you measure the cost of truth? By the blood it takes, or the silence it breaks? The dawn came slow. The sky over the Afghan mountains was the color of bruised steel, streaked with the smoke of burning helicopters and the echoes of a night that refused to end. Marcus Chen sat on the cold stone floor of the ruined relay station, back against the cracked wall, hands stained with blood, some his, most not. Rivera lay still beside him, her face pale but peaceful, her pulse almost gone. Outside, the thrum of approaching helicopters grew louder, not the sharp whine of Hayes's black birds, but heavier, slower, disciplined. Rescue, or something pretending to be. Marcus didn't move. He'd seen enough rescues to know how easily they turned into cover-ups. Hayes was still alive, propped against the wall opposite him, his arm crudely bandaged, uniform torn, eyes dark and cold. "You think you've won," Hayes said, voice hoarse. Marcus didn't answer. Hayes smirked faintly. "They'll scrub this clean before your files even finish uploading. You'll vanish, she'll vanish. Your brother already did." Marcus turned slowly, his gaze quiet, unreadable. Then why are you afraid? Hayes hesitated, a flicker, almost imperceptible. Marcus reached for the satellite phone. The green light still blinked steadily. Signal live, transmission complete. Somewhere someone had heard. The door burst open. Soldiers in desert gear poured in, weapons raised. Their patches were unfamiliar, not Hayes's men. The lead stepped forward, lowering his rifle slightly. Sergeant Marcus Chen. Marcus didn't move. Who are you? Joint Task Command. We picked up a distress broadcast. You need medical attention. Marcus looked past them toward the rising sun. She does first. Medics rushed forward. One knelt by Rivera, checking vitals. Another tried to guide Marcus away. He resisted at first, then finally let them lead him outside. The morning air hit like a blade. The entire valley below was still smoldering, vehicles overturned, craters yawning like graves. The cave entrance was gone, buried under a mountain of rock. He stared at it for a long time, his brother's resting place, his past, his curse. A medic's voice broke through. "Sir, we need to move, you're in shock." Marcus turned. "Where are you taking us?" "Bagram Airfield, sir. Command wants a full debrief." "Which command?" The medic hesitated. "Pentagon liaison." Marcus almost laughed. "Of course." Behind him, 2 soldiers escorted Hayes out on a stretcher. Even wounded, the man looked smug. As they loaded him into a separate helicopter, Hayes caught Marcus's eye and mouthed something, just 2 words. "Too late." The rotors spun up, wind kicking dust into the air. Rivera was lifted into the next bird. Her hand hung loosely from the stretcher's edge, fingers twitching once, barely there, but enough. Marcus reached out, touched her hand, and whispered, "Hold on." Then the world blurred into noise and wind and motion. The flight was silent. Rivera lay under a thermal blanket, her face half-lit by the red interior lights. Medics worked around her, oxygen mask, IV, bandages, all the desperate things humans do to fight inevitability. Marcus sat opposite, staring at the floor, the notebook still in his lap. David's notebook, torn, soaked, but intact. He flipped it open. Pages of coordinates, sketches, coded shorthand. And at the end, one line written in his brother's hand. "Truth isn't a weapon. It's a wound you learn to live with." Marcus closed the book, his throat tight. One of the medics glanced up. "She's fatting. We'll try to stabilize, but—" Marcus's voice cracked. "Don't stop." They didn't. The helicopter descended toward Bagram, its shadow gliding over the desert like a ghost that refused to land. Debriefing room 12 smelled of antiseptic and lies. Marcus sat at a metal table, uniform torn, hands bandaged. Across from him, 3 men in suits, one in dress blues. None wore names. The man in blue spoke first. "Sergeant Chen, I'm Commander Wilcox. You've been through a difficult operation. We need your statement." Marcus stared at him. "Where, Sergeant Rivera?" "She's receiving medical treatment." "Alive." Silence, then, "She's stable." He didn't believe it. Wilcox opened a folder. "According to initial reports, your team engaged in unauthorized combat and compromised a classified site." Marcus's jaw tightened. "We uncovered a black market network run through your own command structure. We exposed Hayes and General Morrison." Another agent leaned forward. "Allegedly." Marcus's voice was flat. "The files were transmitted. You have them." The third man smiled faintly. "We're still verifying their authenticity." That word, authenticity, was the language of bureaucracy, the last refuge of guilt. Marcus leaned forward. "You think I fabricated all that? You think my brother died for nothing?" The man in blue sighed. "Sergeant, these are serious accusations. We're here to determine how much of what you claim is misinterpretation." He almost laughed. "Misinterpretation, is that what you call treason now?" The man's tone hardened. "Watch yourself, soldier." Marcus met his eyes, unflinching. "I stopped being a soldier when you made war profitable." Silence, cold, heavy. Then the door opened. A woman entered, civilian clothes, sharp posture, no visible insignia. The others stood subtly straighter. "Gentlemen," she said smoothly, "that'll be all." The men hesitated, then filed out. She waited until the door closed before turning to Marcus. "You're not wrong," she said, "but you're not safe either." Marcus studied her. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been fighting the same rot from the inside." She slid a small drive across the table. "Your brother sent redundancies, copies outside the military network. Civilian journalists, NGOs, they already have it." Marcus blinked. "So it's out." She nodded. "By now, yes, it can't be buried anymore." For the first time in days, he exhaled, not relief exactly, but something close. "What about Hayes?" "He's in custody. Morrison's being recalled. But don't expect parades. This isn't the kind of truth people celebrate." He almost smiled. "I didn't do it for celebration." She tilted her head. "Then why did you do it?" Marcus looked at his bandaged hands. "Because someone had to." The woman studied him a moment longer, then said quietly, "Rivera asked me to give you something." Marcus froze. "She's alive." "She's in surgery, critical but fighting." The woman handed him a folded scrap of paper. Rivera's handwriting, small, precise. "Tell them we didn't do it for medals. Tell them we did it so someone would finally stop lying." He stared at the words until they blurred. The woman stood. "You'll be discharged, quietly. No charges, no recognition. You'll go home, Sergeant Chen. You've earned the right to be forgotten." He didn't answer. When she left, the room felt smaller. He sat there for a long time, the hum of fluorescent lights pressing into his thoughts. Then he picked up his brother's notebook and Rivera's note, tucked them both into his chest pocket, and walked out. Bagram's airfield stretched into infinity, rows of planes, dust clouds rising like ghosts. Marcus stood at the edge of the tarmac, watching the sunset turn the sky gold. His duffel was light, too light. Everything that mattered had been buried, broadcast, or bled out. He looked down at his hands, at the lines of dried blood etched into his skin. A voice behind him, "You planning to disappear?" He turned. Rivera stood there, pale, wrapped in a hospital blanket, IV still taped to her arm. Her smile was weak but real. "You should be resting," he said quietly. "Doctors said I could walk if I didn't breathe too deep." Marcus let out a shaky laugh. "You never listen." "Neither did your brother." They stood in silence, watching the last helicopter rise into the orange sky. Rivera spoke first. "They'll spin it, you know, call it an isolated incident." "Let them." "And us." Marcus looked at her. "We walk away, but not silent." She nodded slowly. "Then what now, Doc?" He watched the horizon. The wind tugged at his jacket, carrying the faint hum of engines and the whisper of memory. "Now," he said softly, "we live with it." Rivera tilted her head. "The truth." He nodded. "The wound." For a moment they stood there, two soldiers framed against a dying sun, the world behind them burning quietly into history. Then Rivera said, almost to herself, "Maybe dignity isn't about winning or losing." Marcus glanced at her. "Then what is it?" She smiled faintly. "Just showing up when it would have been easier to stay down." He nodded, looking out at the horizon, endless, blinding, honest. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." And somewhere far from command rooms and headlines, a medic and a soldier walked away from the wreckage, not as heroes, not as ghosts, but as proof that conscience still bleeds, quietly, stubbornly, beautifully. What happens after the truth escapes, when it no longer belongs to you, but to everyone who hears it? The news hit the world like a muted explosion. Not with sirens or banners, not with cheering crowds. It spread in silence, leaked files, anonymous videos, blurred documents flashing across late-night news tickers. Whistleblower data suggests senior U.S. officers funneled weapons to insurgent networks. Evidence points to internal cover-ups across multiple deployments. Names withheld pending confirmation. The footage came next. Grainy helmet cam, static-filled audio, a voice saying, "This is David Chen. If you're watching this, the system's already broken." It went viral in hours. By dawn, every major outlet had it. By noon, half of them were calling it fake. By sunset, they weren't sure anymore. And by nightfall, nobody could look away. Marcus Chen watched it all from a distance. Not on a screen, those were long gone. He sat in a motel room somewhere in the Nevada desert, a paper map pinned to the wall, lines connecting names and places that had once mattered. The air smelled of dust and old coffee. He hadn't slept properly in days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Rivera's face on that stretcher. The way her hand had gone limp, then moved again, that small defiance against death. The world had changed since the transmission, but not fast enough. The Pentagon held press briefings, full of words like investigation, accountability, transparency. Then came the resignations, 2 generals, 3 procurement officers, Morrison among them. Hayes disappeared from custody 2 weeks later, en route to a secure facility. Marcus didn't believe the report. People like Hayes didn't vanish, they relocated. Rivera called twice from a rehab center in Virginia. Her voice was softer, slower, but alive. "You still can't sleep, can you?" she asked on the first call. "Doesn't feel like I should," he said. "You did it, Marcus. You finished what David started." He looked out the window at the endless sand. "Did we?" There was silence. Then she said, "You sound like him." That made him smile, despite himself. A week later, he got the letter. No seal, no signature, just a return address in Arlington. Inside was a single page, typed clean. "Sergeant Chen, your discharge is final. No further action will be taken against you. We appreciate your service. We expect your discretion. If you need assistance readjusting, contact the Office of Veterans Affairs. File number 719C. Department of Defense, Records Division." He folded it once, slid it into the trash, and sat down heavily. That was their way of saying thank you for cleaning our mess. Now disappear. He stared at his reflection in the motel mirror. The man who looked back wasn't the medic who joined the SEALs. He wasn't even the man who'd carried Rivera out of that valley. He was something in between, unfinished, haunted, alive in the most inconvenient way. He whispered, "David, what do I do now?" The room answered with silence. The next morning, Rivera showed up in person. He hadn't expected her. She stood at the door in jeans and a military jacket, arms still in a sling, eyes hidden behind aviator shades. "Thought I'd check if you were still breathing," she said. "Barely," he said. She looked around the room, the maps, the notes, the empty coffee cups. "You've been busy. Trying to see what's next." She smiled faintly. "You ever tried just not?" "Not what?" "Not fighting." He gave a small laugh. "You'd last 2 days without a mission." "Maybe, but I'd enjoy those 2 days." She sat down across from him, scanning the papers. "You still tracking Morrison?" "Someone has to. They'll bury him deep. You'll never find him." Marcus leaned back, eyes hard. "They buried my brother too. I still found the truth." She looked at him for a long moment, not with pity, but something gentler. "And what did it change?" He hesitated. The question lingered like smoke. "Maybe it didn't change them," he said finally, "but it changed us." Rivera nodded slowly. "That's enough." For a few days, they stayed in that desert motel. 2 ghosts sharing silence, patching old wounds, pretending the world outside wasn't spinning itself apart over the truth they'd unleashed. They ate cheap takeout, listened to the radio, fixed each other's scars. Sometimes she'd laugh, small, unexpected, like she didn't quite remember how. One night, she found his brother's notebook on the table. "Can I?" she asked. He nodded. She flipped through the pages, pausing at the last one. "He wrote this for you." Marcus glanced up. "What does it say?" Rivera read aloud. "If you ever find this kid, don't try to be like me. Be better, don't fight wars, heal them." She closed the notebook slowly. "You think he'd be proud?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He stared at the horizon through the cracked window, where the desert met the dark. "He'd say we're idiots," Marcus said softly. "Then he'd say he's proud anyway." 2 months passed. The headlines faded. The world moved on. But the cracks had started to show, small, steady, unstoppable. Congress opened hearings. Whistleblowers stepped forward. Old reports resurfaced. The military's shadow economy, the one David had died trying to expose, began to unravel. And yet in the quiet corners, deals still happened. Men like Hayes still existed. The war machine still hummed, just with a fresh coat of paint. Rivera saw it too. "Truth doesn't kill corruption," she said one night. "It just gives it less room to hide." Marcus nodded. "Then we keep shining the light." She raised an eyebrow. "We?" "Yeah," he said. "You really think I'm letting you vanish again?" Rivera smirked. "You don't even know where I'm going." "Doesn't matter, I'll find you." She shook her head, smiling. "You're still a terrible liar, Doc." The next morning she was gone. No note, no goodbye, just her empty mug on the counter and her dog tags left on the table beside his brother's notebook. He stared at them for a long time, the weight of both, past and present, heavy and sacred in his hand. He whispered, "Guess it's just me again." Then he packed up the map, the notebook, and the truth they'd both bled for and walked out into the desert. Months later, a small foundation appeared online. No address, no sponsors, just a mission statement. The Rivera Initiative. For soldiers who served, and for the truths they carried home. It spread quietly, counseling networks, whistleblower protection, medical aid for forgotten veterans. No one knew who ran it. Some said it was backed by journalists. Others whispered it was two ghosts from Afghanistan. Marcus never confirmed it. He didn't need to. He'd moved again, new name, new town, living by the coast this time. He spent his mornings running along the beach, his nights fixing boats for fishermen who didn't ask questions. Every so often, he'd get a postcard. No address, just coordinates. Always signed with a small symbol, a medic's cross drawn next to a pilot's wing. Rivera's mark. He kept every one of them in the same notebook. One evening, the sunset painted the sea gold, and Marcus sat on the dock, flipping through those cards. He found himself smiling. The world was still broken, maybe always would be. But somewhere out there, someone like Rivera was still fighting, still believing that truth mattered even if it hurt. He looked out at the horizon and whispered to the wind, "You were right, David. The wound doesn't heal, but maybe it doesn't have to." He pulled one last letter from his pocket, unsigned, sent months ago, typed on plain paper. "The files you sent reach people who still care. Change is slow, but it started. Don't stop watching." He folded it carefully, tucked it beside Rivera's dog tags, and watched the tide come in. The wind carried the faint smell of salt and sand and memory. He smiled. Some wounds stay open, because they're supposed to remind you what you're capable of surviving. And in the quiet that follows truth, sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is learn to live again. When all the noise fades, what's left, the truth or the silence that follows it? The ocean was calm that morning, too calm. The kind of stillness that made you think the world was holding its breath. Marcus Chen stood on the pier, salt wind brushing against his face, coffee cooling in his hand. The horizon stretched wide and endless, just like the space he'd been trying to fill since Afghanistan. He'd been living by the sea for almost a year now, a nameless town on the California coast, a small workshop with peeling blue paint. He fixed fishing boats, replaced engines, and stitched torn nets with the same steady hands that had once sutured flesh under fire. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he could still hear the chopper blades, the static of the radio, Rivera's voice calling his name through smoke. She was alive somewhere, he knew that much. Her postcards still came every few months, each one from a different corner of the world, sometimes just a word, still breathing, other times a symbol, a small cross and a wing. He never replied. He didn't need to. Some connections didn't need words, just endurance. The news still came occasionally, drifting through his old radio like echoes of a world he'd left behind. Senate hearings continue over the Stone Ledger scandal. New evidence confirms the existence of a covert trade network during the Afghan conflict. Public outcry mounts as officials face prosecution. They never mentioned David's name, or his, or Rivera's. That was fine. Truth wasn't about credit, it was about consequence. And consequence had arrived, slow, relentless, irreversible. He could live with that. That afternoon the wind shifted. The tide was low. Marcus packed his tools, locked the shed, and walked toward the cliffs. It was something he did every week, a ritual. At the top, overlooking the Pacific, he reached into his jacket and pulled out the old notebook. The pages were worn, corners frayed, salt-stained. But the words inside were still legible, the same messy handwriting that had haunted and guided him in equal measure. He flipped to the last page, the line he'd read 1,000 times. Truth isn't a weapon, it's a wound you learn to live with. He ran his thumb across the ink. Yeah, he murmured, I'm still learning. The wind carried his words out to sea. He sat down on the cliff's edge, watching the waves slam into the rocks below, white spray, violent and beautiful. A voice behind him, guess you still like the dramatic view. He turned. Rivera stood there alive, whole, wrapped in a dark jacket and the same calm defiance she'd worn in the mountains. Her hair was shorter, streaked with sun, and her left arm moved stiffly when she took off her sunglasses. Marcus blinked once, disbelieving. You're supposed to be halfway across the world. She smiled faintly. I was, then I realized I was tired of running. He stood. How did you find me? She smirked. You used your brother's service number as your P.O. box code, your predictable doc. He laughed, an actual laugh, the kind he hadn't heard from himself in months. You look good. I've looked worse. They stood there for a moment, the sea roaring beneath them, silence filling everything words couldn't. Finally, she said, the hearings are wrapping up. Morrison's facing trial. Hayes disappeared again. Rumor says he's in Eastern Europe selling security contracts. Marcus's jaw tightened. He'll crawl back into the same hole he came from. Rivera nodded. Probably, but this time people are watching. He glanced at her. You've been watching too. Always. She stepped closer, her voice softening. You kept the notebook. He held it up. It's all I had left. No, she said quietly. It's what you chose to keep. Marcus looked down at the worn leather cover, bloodstains, sand, time etched into every page. He died for this. Rivera shook her head. No, he died for you to live with it. That hit harder than he expected. For a long while they just watched the ocean together, the sound of it vast, eternal, almost cleansing. Rivera spoke again. You ever wonder why he did it? Marcus frowned. Expose them. No, record it, hide it, leave it for you. Marcus thought about it, about his brother, about the cave, about the look on David's face in that final video. He knew the truth couldn't survive in silence, Marcus said finally. He needed someone stubborn enough to carry it, someone dumb enough not to give up. Rivera smiled. Sounds about right. He glanced at her. You could have disappeared for good. Why come back? Her eyes softened. Because sometimes you need to see that what you bled for meant something, that it wasn't just pain. She reached into her pocket and handed him something small, metal, scratched, familiar. A dog tag, his brother. He stared at it, speechless. I found it, she said quietly. In the rubble after they pulled us out, thought it should come home. He took it carefully, the weight of it anchoring something deep inside him. Thank you. Rivera shrugged. You earned it more than I did. He shook his head. No one earned any of it. As the sun dropped lower, the sky turned into fire, oranges bleeding into purples, light fading into memory. Rivera sat down beside him. You ever think about going back? To the service? She nodded. Marcus shook his head slowly. I've seen enough orders to last a lifetime. She smiled faintly. Me too. Then, after a moment, you know what I miss most? He looked at her. What? The quiet before the mission. That heartbeat of calm. When you don't know what's coming but you still believe it'll be worth it. He nodded slowly. That's the hardest thing to let go of. Rivera's gaze drifted toward the horizon. We keep finding new missions, don't we? Just quieter ones. Yeah, he smiled faintly. Quieter ones. The wind grew colder. The last light touched the water and disappeared. Rivera stood, brushing the dust from her jacket. You still running the initiative? He smirked. Depends who's asking. She raised an eyebrow. A donor, maybe a volunteer. He laughed. We could use both. She hesitated, then said softly, there's a new generation coming up, soldiers who don't trust the system the way we used to. They need people who'll tell the truth, even when it hurts. He nodded, then we show them how. Rivera studied him for a long moment. You know something, Marcus? What? You're a better medic than you ever were a soldier. He smiled faintly. Maybe I was never meant to fight, just to fix what war breaks. She nodded. That's what makes you dangerous. He looked at her, the wind moving her hair across her face, the last traces of daylight turning her eyes gold. You leaving again? He asked. She smiled that same tired, fearless smile. Not this time. They stood in silence, side by side, watching the sea. Later that night in the workshop, Marcus hung David's dog tag beside Rivera's on a small nail above the workbench. Below them lay the notebook, open to the last page. He traced the line again with his finger, whispering the words like a prayer. Truth isn't a weapon, it's a wound you learn to live with. Then he added something new beneath it, in his own handwriting. And if you're lucky, you find someone who helps you live with it. Weeks turned into months. The world didn't fix itself, it rarely does. But the initiative grew quietly. Soldiers wrote in from all over, broken, lost, scared, but still alive. And in every reply Marcus sent there was one message, simple and stubborn. You're not alone. The truth doesn't end you, it starts you over. Sometimes Rivera handled the calls. Sometimes she just sat nearby, listening, saying nothing. They didn't talk much about the war anymore. They didn't need to. It lived in them, but it didn't own them. The sea outside whispered the same rhythm every day, crash, retreat, return, like a heartbeat that refused to stop. One evening, Rivera walked into the shop with a small smile. Got something for you. Marcus looked up. What now? She held out a folded newspaper clipping. Headline, Congress passes whistleblower protection expansion, the Rivera-Chen clause. He stared at it, speechless. Rivera shrugged. Guess the world does remember after all. He smiled, a real one, warm and quiet. Guess so. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. How's it feel, Doc? He looked around the small workshop. The waves beyond the window, the dog tags gleaming in the fading light. Like we finally stopped bleeding. And somewhere in the rhythm of the waves, two soldiers, one who healed, one who fought, finally found peace not in victory but in endurance. Because some wounds don't fade. They remind you that you were brave enough to care. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.